It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Have we reached a tipping point in the Middle East? The White House weighs up how to respond to the fatal drone strike on US troops.
I would argue that we have not seen a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 1973.
More details emerge of the soldiers who died as they slept. 40 others were injured in the attack. Also tonight, searching for answers, the families of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham meet the Prime Minister to call for a public inquiry. Time to dispose of disposable vapes. Rishi Sunak says it's right they are banned to prevent children getting hooked. And 2 royals leave hospital, the King with a wave and a smile, but there's a more discreet departure for the Princess of Wales. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. There's a sense that America is about to become a player in a scenario it really wanted to avoid. Joe Biden under huge pressure to retaliate to the drone strike which killed 3 US soldiers. The US president must now find a way to look strong without entering into a conflict with Iran. As Washington tries to hold the line in the Middle East, the White House weighs up how to respond to the first US troop deaths since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. Well, the 3 soldiers died while in their sleeping quarters on their base in the northeast of Jordan, near the border with Syria. Officials said the drone struck a base known as Tower 22. The air defense system had reportedly been switched off to allow an American drone to return. Iran has denied any involvement. Our US correspondent James Matthews has this report.
These are the 3 victims of the Jordan attack. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Breonna Moffett, and Specialist Kennedy Sanders. They were among US troops training Jordanian forces. Early investigations suggest an enemy drone approached as a US drone was coming into land. On their base by the Jordanian border, there was confusion over whether the explosive device was friend or foe, and it breached defences.
And the President's been crystal clear. We will respond decisively to any aggression. And we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops. We'll do so at a time and a place of our choosing.
US and UK forces have already struck at Iranian-backed militia for a wave of attacks across the Middle East. America has pointed the finger of blame in the same direction for the fatal attack. The United States hasn't said what its response will be, but it has spoken of fundamental change.
It's fundamentally different now because we have 3 families who just got the worst possible news. That's different.
President Biden has met in the White House Situation Room with members of his National Security Council, the cast of characters who would formulate America's response. Biden's challenge is to craft a course that asserts American authority and reinforces deterrence without escalating conflict. This was a picture he posted from the White House as Qatar's visiting Prime Minister registered his concerns as he brokers a deal to release hostages.
I hope that nothing would undermine the efforts that we are doing or jeopardize the process, yet it will definitely have an impact on it, and will, one way or another, it will have an impact on the regional security, and we hope that things get contained and not to get escalated beyond control.
Amidst questions over whether US retaliation will involve a strike in Iran itself, Tehran has denied involvement in the Jordanian attack.
Resistance groups across the region do not take orders from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran, while it does not welcome expansion of conflicts in the region, doesn't interfere in decision-making by resistance groups.
At church on Sunday, Joe Biden paused in silence for those Americans killed. A president reflecting on events past and to come.
Well, live to James now in Washington. So, James, how then can the US appear strong and hold the line in the Middle East without entering into a fully fledged war with Iran?
Hi, Anna. Yeah, this moment was always going to come. The death of Americans amidst a relentless wave of attacks. It changes the rules of engagement. The hawks in Washington are calling for a retaliation that reaches inside Iran itself. And that has to be a possibility, at least, for all this is the work of proxy militias. They are militias that are funded, resourced and encouraged by Iran. And the question for Joe Biden is how long or to what extent he can no longer avoid addressing Iran itself. His critics say that point has long since passed, and the deaths of Americans in the Middle East merely amplifies that point. It is clearly a very dangerous situation, recognized as such within the Biden administration. Listen to this from Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, speaking earlier.
This is an incredibly volatile time in the Middle East. I would argue that we've not seen a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 1973, and arguably even before that. And that is the environment in which we're operating. And of course, that was triggered by the horrific attacks of October 7th by Hamas.
Joe Biden's next move has to be measured. He has to protect American lives, project strength and authority without risking an escalation of conflict. His difficulty is that while he is in control of his next move, he's not necessarily in control of the consequences.
James, in Washington, thank you. Well, the Pentagon says the strike on the US airbase came from Kataib Hezbollah, an Iraqi Shiite militia thought to be loyal to and funded by Iran. Tehran has distanced itself and denied giving orders to any faction in the region. But as our international correspondent Alex Rossi explains, there are several groups aligned with Iran or looking to exploit tensions.
Since the drone strike in northern Jordan, which killed 3 American troops, attention has turned to Iran. Since its Islamic Revolution 44 years ago, Iran has built up a network of proxies across the region, the so-called axis of resistance, providing them with weapons, training and funding. It is the mechanism by which Iran's Revolutionary Guard, or IRGC, attempts to wield power against rivals like the Sunni powerhouse, Saudi Arabia, and crucially, Israel. At the centre of this web is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Often described as a state within a state, Hezbollah receives significant financial support from Iran, for example, when it went to war with Israel in 2006. The attack in Jordan has been claimed by Islamic Resistance in Iraq, a coalition of different militia. Iran has ramped up funding for militants inside Iraq since the US-led war there in 2003. These groups were crucial for Iran in its battle against its sworn enemy, the Islamic State. Iran is also a key patron of Hamas and related group Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In its opposition to the existence of Israel, Iran offers hundreds of millions of dollars a year to militants inside Gaza. In Syria, Iran provided the ground force for President Bashar al-Assad during the Syrian civil war and has significant influence over multiple smaller proxy militant groups. Then there are the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis say their actions in the Red Sea are directly linked to Israel's action in Gaza. They want a ceasefire and the blockade to be lifted. Iran may not have total power over the Houthis, who have their own military aims, but they are willing to act along the ideological lines of resistance. These groups cross ethnic and religious divides and don't necessarily share the same ideological goals. That might sound counterintuitive, but the network functions as a two-way street.
Each of these militias, when it comes to the domestic level, yes, they have domestic agency. But when it comes to the regional and overarching global objectives, they are aligned ideologically with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they will go out of their way to prove their worth to their godfather, the IRGC, so as to obtain more resources, so as to become closer to that inner circle.
So what can President Biden actually do? He is under enormous domestic pressure to strike back at Iran directly, particularly given this is the first time American military personnel have been killed in this conflict. It may restore deterrence, but it also risks igniting an even broader and deadlier regional conflagration.
Well, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Amman in Jordan, and we can speak to him now. Some more details released tonight, Dominic. What is your assessment then of this situation? As we just heard Antony Blinken calling it the most dangerous time in the Middle East since 1973.
Which is quite something, isn't it, Anna? Because Antony Blinken is not a man given to hyperbole or exaggeration. He's someone who's quite a cool customer, mild-mannered, tough and resolved, but not somebody who exaggerates. For him to say it's like 1973, which was the Yom Kippur War, when Syria and Egypt led pretty much the entire Arab world to try and wipe out Israel, it came pretty close to that. And then when Israel got the upper hand in turn, they had to be called off by Henry Kissinger, the US Secretary of State, to avoid Russia getting drawn in. And it was a classic example of what we have now as well, which is a region that is a tinderbox and where one thing can lead to another in war. We've been saying for months now, since October the 7th, that even though we don't think Iran wants a full-scale regional war, and clearly America doesn't want either, war is not an exact science, and one thing can lead to another. Escalation or miscalculation can lead to escalation, and one thing can lead to another. And I think what we had last night with this drone getting past the defences of this US military base here in Jordan and killing 3 soldiers is an example of that. And of course, the question now is how America responds. US President Joe Biden doesn't want to show any weakness for geopolitical reasons. It's very dangerous to show weakness in this part of the world, but also for domestic political reasons. He can't show weakness as well. But also he can't get drawn into a full-scale regional war or provoke one with Iran, not least because his presumed contender in the election, Donald Trump, has made a lot about how America must avoid forever foreign wars in future. And of course, a full-scale regional war will not be good for anyone. But he's got to be tough and strong. And the danger is if he overreacts, if he hits Iranians and kills a lot of them, if he attacks Iran itself, it could lead to an escalating momentum that will then be irreversible. So I think for all those reasons, the region is at a very nerve-wracking moment in the hours ahead, and Joe Biden has a very difficult decision, probably the most fateful of his entire presidency so far, to make tonight or in the days ahead.
Dominic, they're in Amman. Thank you. Well, Germany and Austria have joined Britain in suspending their funding to UNRWA, the UN aid agency working in Gaza. It follows Israeli allegations that a number of agency staff were involved in the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. 9 employees have been sacked and an investigation is continuing. The families of the 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham last June have met the Prime Minister to call for a wide-ranging public inquiry. The parents and relatives of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Cooper and Ian Coates also met the Labour leader, the Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary in Westminster. Meanwhile, Leicestershire Police has referred itself to the police watchdog over the assaults allegedly committed by Valdo Calcani just weeks before the killings. Here's Sky's Midlands correspondent Becky Cottrell and warning that her report contains some flash photography.
Barnaby, Grace and Ian. Their faces are now known to so many because of the way they were killed. It means their families have had to grieve very publicly, and now they're demanding answers. Meeting with the Prime Minister, Cabinet Secretaries, as well as Keir Starmer. Barnaby and Grace were walking home from a night out when they were attacked by this man, Valdo Calcani, a paranoid schizophrenic who stabbed the students to death before knifing school caretaker Ian Coates. Calcani said voices in his head told him to do it, but why was he free to kill despite an outstanding arrest warrant, a history of assaults and multiple stays in a psychiatric hospital? There will now be a special review of the NHS trust that treated him. But the families of Calcani's victims want more. The Prime Minister told them he wouldn't be launching a public inquiry, but hasn't ruled one out.
We did get an assurance from the Prime Minister himself that if it's required, they're not ruling out a public inquiry, and they will do a public inquiry. And if what they're trying to do at the moment doesn't give the answers we need, then they'll go on and do what we believe they need.
We're looking at failings. Yeah. Our children were failed.
Incompetencies.
Incompetencies. Samples were not taken whilst we were told that they were taken, or things were done and we were assured that they were done, but they weren't done.
The families are willing to be patient for now, but they will need answers, not least, they say, to their request for the Attorney General to review Kalakani's sentence. Their fear is that he could one day be released from the psychiatric facility he's being kept in back into the community. The man they describe as a monster had a history of not taking his medication. He thought he was being controlled by MI5 and mental health services, who are now under scrutiny. In a statement, Nottinghamshire Healthcare said, "We welcome external inspections as they are important to helping us learn and continually improve our services, giving us independent insight to highlight areas for development so that the experience for those who use our services is improved. We look forward to working with the Care Quality Commission and NHS England, and we undertake to swiftly implement any recommendations." Recommendations that will, of course, come too late to save Emma and David Webber's son.
Our lives have been shattered. It's a catastrophic, life-changing event. And how do you even begin to unpick and find your way forward, especially when it's so high profile, when you can't look at newspapers or the news for weeks because your son is on the front. And horrible stories coming out about the perpetrator and just the viciousness, and it's so difficult.
Nothing can ever bring back Barney, Grace or Ian, but accountability is vital to bring some kind of closure to those who love them so much. Becky Cottrell, Sky News.
Rishi Sunak says his plan to ban disposable vapes is the strong action needed to stop children from taking up the habit. The ban is expected to be introduced across the UK, although it's not clear when. Some in the industry have said vapers are being sacrificed for votes, and the former Prime Minister Liz Truss has objected to the ban. Our chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam has more.
5 million disposable vapes are thrown away in the UK every week. They litter our streets, and the government says they threaten the health of the growing number of children using them. Concerning enough for the Prime Minister on a visit to a school in Darlington to confirm he is taking action.
Have you found that over the last year or two, has this become a bigger problem at school? Find more or when you're outside, has this become something that you see more of around?
I'd say it happens a lot in Darlington, but in our school it's quite limited.
The children shouldn't be vaping. We don't want them to get addicted. We still don't understand the full long-term health impacts of vaping, so it's right that we take strong action to stamp this out.
Between 5 and 10% of our young people are using vapes outside of school and in the community, and that's around 150 kids.
It's schools like this one in Greater Manchester where they see the impact. Nationally, the number of teenagers vaping has tripled in 3 years, even though under 18s are already supposedly banned from buying or using them.
We do have a duty to say it's not right. You shouldn't have access to those things, and you should be concentrating on enjoying yourself, living life, getting out into the outdoors, rather than sitting in a bus shelter smoking on vapes.
But this is a government that encouraged the use of vapes to get people to give up smoking.
If those products are banned, as I say, we applaud the efforts because we are appalled of the access from rogue traders through this product set. But come to a specialist, reputable retailer and you'll have a plethora of simple devices that people can transition to. And the key thing there is to enable them to be simple, that smokers can access them in the same simple way that they can access combustible cigarettes.
There are concerns, too, that going after vapes like these will simply fuel the growing black market of unregulated ones, containing who knows what, and the health risks that go with it. And in trying to cut vaping and smoking, the Prime Minister faces opposition from within, led by Liz Truss. He may need the promised Labour support if things like this really are to be taken off our streets. Greg Milam, Sky News, Oldham.
An investigation by Sky News and The Independent has uncovered evidence of nearly 20,000 sexual assaults and complaints of harassment in NHS England mental health trusts. Dozens of patients and their families have now come forward to share their experiences. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
He was touching me, rubbing my hand, my arm, and then went up. He then asked me if he could continue, and I said no. He repeated a couple of times, and I said no. I can't believe I've got into this situation. He shouldn't be touching me. God, he shouldn't even be in my room.
Rivka has struggled with her mental health since her teens. Those were her own words from a diary she kept, detailing a sexual assault on her in a hospital ward by a member of staff.
He said to me he wasn't going to leave until I stopped crying. He told me I am not allowed to tell anyone. He kept saying, I've got a wife and 2 kids. I can't lose this job. And that was really what made me realise how bad this was.
Rivka's attacker was convicted and jailed. In a statement, North London Mental Health Partnership told Sky News, "We are deeply sorry for what happened to Miss Grant while she was under our care in 2016. We have since strengthened all aspects of our safeguarding processes, including ensuring that service users under one-to-one observation are always assigned a member of staff of the same sex." A successful conviction for a sexual assault on a mental health patient is extremely rare. Many attacks are never reported to the police, and patients are not always believed.
My real emphasis is on a proper registration of workers, a proper complaint system, training people to recognise the signs, and then at the top end, real notice taken by the police in any complaint of this kind coming out of a mental health hospital, which in itself would send a big message down.
A joint investigation by Sky News and The Independent has uncovered 20,000 complaints of sexual assaults in mental health trusts across England since 2019. Have you been surprised by the scale of the abuse?
I'm not surprised at all. I believe there is so much going on that is not reported, not listened to. I was able to tell my story. I was able to get it out there. But if I'd been unable to do that, it would have just been shoved under the carpet like many others.
Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to more from Patient 11 on the new investigative podcast from Sky News and The Independent. All episodes are available now wherever you get your podcasts. Police have named the 2 teenagers who died in a stabbing at the weekend. 15-year-old Mason Wrist and 16-year-old Max Dixon died following the incident in Bristol on Saturday. 2 more people, a 20-year-old man and a 22-year-old, have been arrested in connection with their deaths. The government's Rwanda legislation has passed its first hurdle in the House of Lords. An opposition amendment was defeated after the Archbishop of Canterbury warned the government's plans were leading the nation down a dangerous path. The French President Emmanuel Macron says he will meet the President of the European Commission this week to secure further support for farmers. Today, tractors were placed on motorways and main roads around Paris as they continued their protests against subsidies and food imports. The daughter of Muriel McKaye, who was murdered in the UK more than 50 years ago, has met her mother's killer. She was kidnapped for ransom in December 1969 after being mistaken for the wife of Rupert Murdoch. Diane flew to the Caribbean to ask him where he buried her body. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports now from Trinidad.
4,000 miles from London, an 8-hour flight, but a journey of more than 50 years. Diane McKaye has come to Trinidad for an extraordinary meeting.
Hello, Diane. It's me. I came all this way to see you.
Thank you, God bless you. It may look like a greeting of old friends, but Nizamuddin Hussain is the man who kidnapped and murdered Diane's mother, Muriel. Muriel's grandson came too.
I'm so happy to meet you.
I am too. Nizam was 22, his brother Arthur 12 years older, when they kidnapped Muriel. They were jailed for life. They held her at a Hertfordshire farm and demanded £1 million ransom. Muriel was married to Alec McKaye, a newspaper executive. The kidnappers mistook Muriel for Anna, then wife of Rupert Murdoch, who was Alec's boss. Nizam claims Muriel collapsed and died, and he buried her in the farmyard. The family needs his help to find her remains.
I thought you've got to try and see him as the young man that did the crime, not this old, funny old guy who's left. You know, you've got to see him, see through all that. And that's the only way I can cope with it.
Scotland Yard searched the farm 2 years ago, But Nizam says they dug in the wrong place.
We come just not to say hello, we come to show you photos. We have a lot of photos of the farm before, we have a lot of photos of this farm now, and we want you to show us exactly where you put my mother, because I would like to take her out and I would like to give her a burial she deserved, because she was a lovely person.
It was time to look at the photographs of the farm, old and new.
Here was your fence along the back. This was the fence, the hedge along the back.
There was much Nizam couldn't remember, but he was adamant on the burial site.
2 feet from the hedge, that's where the body is.
And the police won't listen to us until we have very good details. They don't want to know.
After 2 days of questions, Nizam was back at home. With some food for you. It's a world away from the plush hotel where he'd met his visitors. Did you tell them everything you know?
I think so.
The McKaye family recently offered him $50,000 to talk to them, but he did it for free. The fact that Nizam has rejected the money fuels the family's belief that he is telling the truth, and he really has identified the spot where they will find Muriel's remains. But they can't be certain he's told them everything. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Trinidad.
The King has left hospital after receiving treatment for an enlarged prostate. He smiled and waved as he walked out to a waiting car with the Queen Camilla by his side. Earlier, away from the cameras, the Princess of Wales left the same hospital where she'd had abdominal surgery nearly 2 weeks ago. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
You can't quite hear what he's saying. The smiles and waves enough to show the King is doing okay.
How are you feeling?
3 days he'd been in for a procedure for an enlarged prostate, an organised photo call, not usually how the royals decide to leave hospital, but they're also not normally this open about what's been wrong. On social media, the palace said he's delighted it's made a difference, and so are the charities.
The King's announcement has gone a long way to help people to be more open. And let's face it, the King is the ultimate celebrity, and celebrity always drives conversation. So the fact that he's come out, we're finding it. So with a 60% uptick in inquiries and men being more open. So this is a good thing. It's got to be a good thing.
Of course, he wasn't the only royal being treated here. Flowers driven away by a police officer, the only little hint that the Princess of Wales may have also left. Before a statement confirmed she's now back home in Windsor, continuing her recovery from abdominal surgery. Two very different departures, but now you have two senior royals asking for their privacy to be respected as they take time to rest. For the King, that is likely to mean a month away from public duties. And for the Princess of Wales, it's going to be much longer than that. The Princess was last seen at Christmas, and it's less clear what's wrong with her. We're told it's not cancerous, but she won't be back to royal duties until after Easter. Prince William, keen to be there for Kate and the children, is still weighing up when he'll get back to work. Which leaves Queen Camilla, who visited her husband every day, now picking up the royal duties for him and the rest of the family. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at the London Clinic.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. And among the stories, we will be discussing this on the front of the Metro, the headline, Royals on the road to recovery, as we just saw in our pictures. Back with that and plenty more, of course, in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States will respond at a time of its choosing, following the fatal drone strike which killed 3 American soldiers. The families of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham have met the Prime Minister to call for a public inquiry. And the King has left hospital after surgery. The Princess of Wales has also returned home after her operation. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look then at what's on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. So let's check out the front pages then, starting with The Times front page. They've learned that Iranian dissidents living in the UK have been warned by counter-terrorism police of an increased risk of violence and kidnap. And The Guardian reports that households across England are facing a £2 billion council tax increase this spring, despite Rishi Sunak's promise of pre-election giveaways. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail leads with Rishi Sunak condemning rail bosses for refusing to use new legislation to limit the impact of strikes. As the King and the Princess of Wales are released from hospital on the same day, the Metro has the headline, Royals on the road to recovery. The Mirror chooses this headline, Home to Recover, for that story. The Daily Telegraph headline, Farmers lay siege to Paris, they say, with the vow to cut off food. The Financial Times reports that the parent company of the gambling firm Paddy Power intends to move its primary stock market listing from London to New York. And the Daily Star reports that Vladimir Putin may have lost a valuable intelligence asset in the form of a beluga whale. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's go to Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. Lots of mulling, no doubt, in the White House or Congress as well. Daily Telegraph has this on the front page. What to do about those, or that strike on the Tower 22 on the border with Jordan. 3 US service personnel lost their lives, 40 at least, we're told, injured. So what does America do?
Well, TBC, but at the moment it's not entirely clear where you strike. Obviously, with the Houthis in Yemen who are attacking ships in the Red Sea, obvious targets have been identified, can be taken out. It feels to me this is a bit of a sucker punch that caught America off guard. They weren't expecting it, and I'm not entirely sure they know yet where to strike. Obviously, incredibly sad news. 2 of those soldiers that died very young. Lots of calls for calm tonight. Rishi Sunak saying, on the one hand, everyone needs to calm the hell down, but also we stand resolutely, etc., with our allies. I think if they knew where to punch back, they would have punched back by now.
Interesting. There have been a lot of briefings this evening. The Pentagon suggesting we don't seek a war. We don't think Iran is seeking a war. We heard from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The response against Iran, he said, could be multi-levelled, come in stages and be sustained over time. So the suggestion there that there will definitely be a response, but we wait to see where and on what.
Yeah, I think the most emergent thing facing the White House at the moment is to try and sort of de-escalate tensions a bit. I mean, it's obviously the region is erupting, but whether it's in the Red Sea or on Israel, Gaza, there's really hugely heightened tensions there. And I think that the White House, particularly given some of the domestic commentary on it in the United States from Donald Trump and others, will want to try and draw some of the heat out of it, precisely because they don't know exactly where the attacks came from. That it almost feels like it was a sort of a lucky opportunity for the Houthi, for the Iran-backed rebels, rather. And they apparently a drone followed. Telegraph mentions this as well. The drone that came into the camp and hit their container housing units had been mistaken for an American craft, so it hadn't been targeted by US air defences. So it feels like it was sort of almost accidental, really, rather than, or lucky, I suppose, from their point of view, but terribly unlucky for the people that were on the receiving end of it. And the Americans are saying, yes, they'll absolutely do what's required to protect themselves, but they don't know yet exactly what path that's going to take. And given the heightened conflict in the region, they're going to be, I think, probably thinking very carefully about where they decide to respond and how.
Yes, and indeed how serious this is. Anthony Blinken talking about this is the most serious situation for the Middle East since 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Yeah. The Eye takes us to Cameron, warning that the UK is facing its biggest threat since the Cold War, talking about new dangers to democracy. Obviously the war with Ukraine is still there. We know that Russia has influence, and relations with Syria and Iran as well. So, what is the seriousness of this?
You can't help but think that there is a deliberate and very obvious strategy by Iran and Russia to move attention away from Ukraine, to try and split the West by opening up this entire front. It doesn't seem to be, there's no one incident, obviously, apart from October the 7th, was obviously a horrific incident that Israel has absolute right, as we've discussed many times, to avenge. But these little incidents that are happening so far, nothing's quite big enough to trigger a wider regional conflict, but it just keeps the whole thing bubbling over and destabilising it. All the while, the world's attention is shifting away from Ukraine. You can't help but think that is responsible. I couldn't help but look at that headline and compare it a little bit to, I don't know if you've noticed as I have over the last 2 weeks or so, there's been all this talk about World War III and conscripting Britons, and you've seen the top brass suddenly wheeled out. And you think, gosh, this is all very scary. Then you realise there's a budget in a month's time. And you're beginning to think, hang on, is there a bit of Whitehall bartering going on here? Obviously, the Foreign Office would like some more money, especially now they've got such an influential and powerful man in the big seat in the Foreign Office. So I wonder if he's lobbying for some more cash. The MOD certainly want more money, and they are making this case that it is an incredibly dangerous and different world. And, Jeremy Hunt once said that he thinks that defence spending should be running at 4%. So I wonder whether he's on board with this as well. And you have to wonder that there's a Prime Minister his Foreign Office credentials, his Foreign Affairs credentials weren't spectacular before he got the job. He obviously brought Cameron in to help him out on that. And I wonder whether there's a bit of horse trading going on here about the budget, because there have been hints and smoke signals that we picked up that there will be an increase in defence spending. But it sounds to me like Cameron's on board with those that think it needs to be pretty hefty.
And there's politics, obviously, on this side of the Atlantic. There's also politics going on the other side of the Atlantic, and the Metro and others talk about or report.
Yeah, enter the Donald. Yeah, right on cue.
Which he says this attack would never have happened if I was president, not even a chance. Just like the Hamas attacks on Israel wouldn't have happened, the war in Ukraine would never have happened. I mean, how he single-handedly expected to prevent them, I don't know. And what it's done in the States is kick off a round of comparisons between how many US troops had been killed in combat under previous presidents, which is really, pretty desperate stuff. He seems to be pointing the finger at Joe Biden, saying it's his fault. And, by way of comparison, 65 US service personnel were killed, including in every year of Trump's presidency. And you go much further back, and you're looking at, for example, under George Bush and Iraq, thousands of US troops killed. And it seems like, I'm really uncomfortable with that sort of, horse trading of numbers, that sort of, fighting over numbers when it comes to people's lives. And unfortunately, it's yet another, I think, example of the sort of campaign we're likely to see ahead of us if Trump is, as expected, selected as the Republican candidate.
Yeah, when he did have the opportunity to whack Iran and knock out one of the most significant figures when he droned Soleimani, I can't remember exactly the year it was, but it knocked Iran for 6, and it put them back in their box for a fair while. So you do wonder whether there is something to the sort of tough man idea of actually the unpredictability of Donald Trump meant that people didn't quite mess with him the same way, whereas Biden tends to be a little bit like Sunak. Everything's done with the G7, everything's done with the international allies, everything goes through a process, it takes days and days to do it, whereas someone who's a little less predictable in the White House just goes, you know what, you hit me, bang, I'm going to hit you harder.
Yeah, and well, I was just going to say, in the bigger picture world of all of this, you know, after the pullout of Afghanistan, largely from Iraq, you know, people will be surprised that there are so many US troops still in the Middle East. The question is, you know, they're there obviously after the fall of Islamic State, trying to prevent them, you know, their resurgence and so on. But actually, the fear is that the US influence in the region is waning, even over Israel, some might say. But, you know, is that also a very important part of this, the global policeman element of the US in a region as volatile as this?
Well, I think because the US, for some years, had sort of turned inwards, and whether it's Biden with his sort of protectionist approach to the economy, and whether it's Trump's unpredictability, as Harry mentioned previously, his relationship with other countries has, in some regards, changed. Now, where it's still the same is that it is obviously the key member of NATO. But even with that, Donald Trump was suggesting, I'm not sure he ever really would have done, but Donald Trump was suggesting that the US may not want to stay in NATO forever. And then particularly the relationship with Russia. Yes, maybe Vladimir Putin was put off by his unpredictability, but also, you know, there are fears now, if he is re-elected as president, that he could basically pull back on that very substantial military support that the US has provided to Ukraine in the conflict with Russia, and you know, Europe is going to have to step up if that happens, in order to continue supporting it. So, you know, it's not a new thing, I don't think, and I think it's all sort of up in the air and all up for grabs really, with the general election, with the presidential election rather, coming up stateside, and obviously the general election here.
I've got two Guardian stories, one of which is yours, so I might do the other one first. So I'll swap them round, if you don't mind. Do the council tax first to you, Harry.
Yeah.
Dismay as households face a £2 billion council tax increase.
Yeah, this is going to work out about yet another £100 on a Band D property, which basically was sort of slipped out a little bit. The mood music was there last week, and Richard Partington at The Guardian was good to spot this, which is essentially there was a bit of a bailout, another bailout for town halls. Last week, an extra 600 million they weren't expecting. But actually, if you look at the small print, that involves the rising of council tax by 4.99%, which is the maximum you can raise council tax without having to have a local referendum, which obviously no one would ever win. So, yet again, another 5% council tax rise coming down the line, just as Rishi Sunak's and Jeremy Hunt's going to make a big song and dance about cutting personal taxes. Give it with one hand, take it away with another, and round we go again.
OK, and your story, Kemi Badenoch, after...
I love this story. This is my favourite story of the evening.
On the Sunday political shows, including on ours here on Sky News, talking about Westminster tittle-tattle, you know, the efforts to unseat Rishi Sunak. What have you found out?
Well, she came on the broadcast round yesterday and told everybody to stop, told everyone in her party to stop messing around.
Stop plotting.
And to get behind Sunak. And what I discovered was that she's actually a member of a WhatsApp group with Michael Gove, one of her key backers, and other supporters, Tory MP supporters, that is called Evil Plotters, which, given she's sort of raised an eyebrow at others for some of this behaviour not being entirely unified behind the dear leader, is really perhaps less than a good look. Now, you know, I suspect this is ironic. I suspect this is a reference to Nadine Dorris's book, The Plot, in which she suggested that Kemi Badenoch and Michael Gove and various others were plotting to, at that point, get rid of Boris Johnson, but now presumably Rishi Sunak as well. However, it just feels unwise at the moment of heightened tensions when Kemi Badenoch is the favourite in all the Conservative Home surveys of Tory party members to be the favourite member of the cabinet to take over from Rishi Sunak at some point. And when she and Suella Braverman are kind of the two big names that repeatedly get talked about when it comes to, you know, what their plans are, should they wish Rishi Sunak to, you know, to step down this side of an election or post an election. I don't think Kemi Badenoch is actively trying to explode his leadership, but what I'm told is that she's basically given a tacit nod to her supporters to prepare and plan for a campaign at such a point that that there's a leadership contest and a vacancy for the top job.
Quick thoughts then?
So I bumped into a Labour shadow minister on the way here, actually, who said, the most boring naming WhatsApp group is the most exciting one. That's where that's where real plotting is done. Actually, in the Jeremy Corbyn years, they had sort of these ridiculously long names of, Backbench Business Committee number 1641321, and that's where the real dirt was.
Oh.
But I suspect evil plotters, it's very silly. It's just a little bit tone deaf.
Okay.
To have gone on the broadcast round and not thought that someone might do me in here.
Keep digging. You need to find Wednesday afternoon tea, and that'll be the dangerous one. Lots more stuff to come, including Rishi Sunak isn't happy that rail companies won't commit to backing new legislation which would limit the impact of strike action. Back with that and more in just a moment.
We all live in an uncertain world. From global conflict and crises to moments full of hope and unity. We'll take you to the heart of the story and help you understand the world around us. Join me, Yalda Hakim, on my new show, The World, on Sky News.
I went through a similar experience where I was sentenced to the electric chair. I remember the judge telling me I was going to be taken to the Rockview State Prison where 2,200 volts of electricity would course through my body and end my life. And then they changed it and made it lethal injection. So I wasn't ever sentenced to be stabbed with a needle, but they changed it. And that's what they're doing here. So what's bothering me, is troubling me, is they tried to execute this man for hours with needles. Imagine laying on a gurney and they're poking you in your groin, in your neck, all over your body, trying to get a vein to murder you. And you succeed in surviving that, only to be an experiment like a guinea pig. So this is horrifying that the state of Oklahoma and the state of Mississippi are going to start doing this, because successfully, opponents of the death penalty stopped them from getting the drugs. I'm so grateful that I went to death row, because all my childhood friends died of drug overdoses or violence or suicide, and I was spared the AIDS epidemic, and I started to learn self-respect and self-love. And I elevated my entire life because I was on death row. And even though I was there wrongly, it didn't matter. I needed to use that opportunity. I was physically tortured for years for being a rapist murderer they thought was mentally ill. I went through a lot of degradations, but I learned when people are harming you, you can really find it within yourself at that moment to love you. I was suffering from hepatitis C infection after they beat me and broke my teeth in prison, and I contracted this illness that was killing my fellow prisoners. So after listening to them die in horrifying fashion with the nurses taunting them, I asked that my appeals be dismissed and my lawyers be dismissed so that I could be executed. I spent 23 years in solitary confinement. That means every day of my life I was locked up 23 hours a day while I was being openly tortured. They took me off of death row and they put me in a mental cell because they feared I was going to kill them for what they did to me. So I spent the last 8 months of my life in prison in a mental ward being told that no human being could endure what we did to you without you being angry enough to kill one of us. So we're not going to trust you until we open the door.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Harry Cole and Pippa Creel. Welcome back to both of you. Checking to see what trains are on. See if
there are no trains.
Because the point is, in the Daily Mail, Rishi goes to war over rail strikes. You know, the rules on whether you can limit rail strikes after another batch of them coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, including tomorrow, which is going to be. I've just found out and realised a
Scuppering
complete joy tomorrow.
Get to work now.
Yeah.
Cycle, walk.
Yeah, I think my
drive.
Probably going to drive. Yeah, so they have these minimum service levels legislation that's been passed through many great battles in the Lords and the Commons, and Labour have vowed to get rid of, but actually no one's even using them. So I haven't actually had time to read Rishi's words, but I pretty can guess that he's not very happy about this.
Yeah, it's frustrating, he says, that yet again, ASLEF's leadership have shown no interest in resolving this dispute while continuing their campaign of contempt for British passengers and taxpayers. There we are.
Well, there we go. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think he probably, in one of the rare moments, speaks for most commuters and the nation. I mean, you can't say that about most of the things that come out of his mouth, but most people are getting pretty sick of this, you know, especially when you see the train drivers and ASLEF earning 60 grand a year.
But the train drivers are.
Yes, well, the train drivers,
yes, but then there's also RMT, obviously.
But this is about ASLEF,
you know, they represent rail cleaning staff as well.
But these are drivers out strikes.
But the point is, how do you avoid rules on minimum service levels if the legislation is...
Well, the legislation's been brought in, and Rishi Sunak, Downing Street, was saying this morning that they would the Prime Minister was disappointed that the train operating companies had not decided to use the legislation, which is now there and which they can. That was the legislation, as Harry referred to, that was passed last year, that requires enough people to work during strikes to make sure that a minimum service of 40% of the full timetable operates.
Which is it sounds like a good day on the trains then, basically.
And none of them appear to have used that, including, I think, LNER, which is of course publicly owned. So I'm surprised that they haven't done it. And it really, I think, raises a question about how effective the legislation is if the train operating companies, the one hand,
and they're planning on rolling this stuff out
actually...
to blue lights and to ambulance workers to various other parts of the NHS. So if they can't even make it work on the trains, then was it just a big old political fight that they fancied having, but
for no reason whatsoever?
Well, maybe they thought it would work, maybe it didn't, but we hear that a lot.
Sounding tough on the union paymasters, all that sort of thing.
It's all political, isn't it? Anyway, Daily Mail picks up on the Princess of Wales departing hospital, but of course nobody saw her.
That's not her now. That's her before Sandringham before she was...
And in fact, many of the newspapers, and nearly all the newspapers, have on the front either King Charles or the Princess of Wales, including the Metro and others.
Yeah, so they've both been... The royals have had a bit of a couple of weeks of it, haven't they? Prince Charles was having treatment... King Charles, sorry, was having treatment for his enlarged prostate, which is a very common condition of men of a certain age, I'm told. And but nevertheless, the fact that he's been given sort of credit, hasn't he, for going public with it and encouraging more men of the same age to approach the NHS. I'm not sure he really had much choice, given he's the king, to tell the whole world what was going on.
He's gone through the front door. He's taken the attention off of Princess Catherine to let her recover in privacy. I think they're actually seeing a little bit more of the king in the last week, going into hospital, going out of hospital, than you would have done, I think, if it wasn't a...
And Camilla back and forth.
Exactly.
Okay.
But, you're going to... Oh, all right, I'll stop talking. I had one point to make, but it's fine.
No.
Do it later.
I've cut him. Harry, Pippa, thank you. See you later. To the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So Tuesday, an improving picture with the cloudy, damp weather slowly pulling away from England and Wales. First thing on Tuesday, it will be gloomy and dank for much of England and Wales, but at least it will be relatively mild. In Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, the skies will be clear, ensuring a cold and frosty start to the day. Sunshine over the northern and western areas will slowly start to spread into parts of England and Wales during the day. The cloudy, murky weather will begin to break up.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. We'll have the latest on the Middle East as President Biden vows to retaliate following that drone attack in Jordan.